Well, welcome to the Additive Technology and Dentistry KeySplint Clear Printed Nightguards. It is a webinar being presented by Jamie Stover, CDT, from Carbon. And now I turn to Dennis Urban, CDT, Director of Clinical Education. He will be introducing tonight's guest star, and please feel free to reach out to him with any questions or concerns about what you would like to learn about in the future. Take it away, Dennis.
All right. Well, thank you, Jessica, and thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. We have a very informative webinar here. I'm looking forward to it. And I just want to give you a little background on Jamie Stover, who's a friend of mine also. And Jamie Stover, CDT, is the Senior Manager of Dental Lab Applications at Carbon. And Jamie has been a dental laboratory technician for over 23 years and has extensive experience in all aspects of transitioning workflow from analog processes to digital, both clinically and in lab. And Jamie has written dozens of articles for publication in domestic and international trade journals, and he lectures regularly on a myriad of topics for dental professionals. And in his role at Carbon, Jamie is a consultant for laboratories and dentists on streamlining production with digital workflow and implementing strategies for business growth, development, and utilization of new applications. Jamie is a member of several professional organizations, including the Dental Technician Alliance of the American College of Prosthodontists, the NADL Business Management Committee, and he serves with me as a trustee on the National Board for Certification in Dental Lab Technology. It is my pleasure to welcome Jamie Stover. Thank you, Jamie, for coming on with us tonight.
Thank you very much, Dennis, for that awesome introduction, and thanks, Jessica and Lisa. Yeah, it's a small world. Happy to be here amongst friends and colleagues tonight. I'm really appreciative of this opportunity. Sit on a board with Lisa, and on the board that I'm on, Dennis is actually just moving into a past executive chair role on that board. And I got moved into a fiscal officer or treasurer position. And I don't think Dennis realizes that my math skills are not that good. So hopefully I don't let him down and I make him proud. But thank you very much. A little more housekeeping here. This is a presenter disclosure, just saying that I do work for Carbon, and also that this program has received no financial or in-kind support from any commercial or other organization, including Carbon. And if you have any questions or concerns, you could reach out to Dennis on that. And now I think all the housekeeping is out of the way, and we're off to the races. You know, we really can't talk about anything in our industry unless we talk about the fact that technology is evolving very fast in our lives, right? We know this statement is true. I don't know if Elon Musk is the first person to say this. I heard him say it first, so I always credit him. Elon Musk says a lot, and you might not like everything he says, but this we know is actually pretty solid. We know when we go to bed at night and we put our phones on our nightstands, sometimes we wake up in the morning and the software is updated and our cell phone's functionality is a little bit different, right? That maybe some of the emojis are different, or the apps are function a little bit different, and things change so fast, we just take that for granted. And, in our industry, what we take for granted is the fact that the fixed side of the industry transitioned to digital products and processes in lab, largely, over a decade ago, right? My CDT is in Crown and Bridge. So years and years ago, I was a bench technician. I was waxing and casting and polishing gold crowns. I was waxing and casting copings, opaquing them, stacking porcelain on them. And so I was around when, milling came in and digital design came in. And if anybody remembers those days, like I do, you remember that when zirconia first came around, it was a clunky process, right? The software that we used to design the restorations was pretty rudimentary, and it was really closed. And it was also, the zirconia, the aesthetics resembled chalk, if you remember. I mean, the translucency was not there. And so there was this fear, I remember, amongst some of my fellow technicians that, okay, here we go. Machines are going to replace humans. We're going to be out of jobs. And I'm here to tell you that, years and years ago, sitting there as a technician at the bench, that actually was a catalyst for my career. It springboarded me into a whole nother direction in this industry, really accepting technology and then learning how to implement it, and then helping clinicians and technicians do that. So, now, today, why that's relevant is because the removable side of our industry is undergoing a major shift. You probably realize this, that products like dentures and night guards and splints are now finally getting their chance to go digital, as we say, right? And they were held up for a long time by materials and by the software, the design software, and by materials. And now we're at a point, and that's what we're going to be talking about here tonight, specifically narrowing the lens on night guards and splints, is some pretty innovative materials that allow us to print them on 3D printers. But still, you know, we're at an interesting intersection in our industry, where there's still the art and the hand craftsmanship that's still so vital to what we do, because every single thing a dental lab does is a bespoke product. It only goes in one patient's mouth, one way. It's a custom one-off piece, right? And dental labs, you know, they have to do that repeatedly, reliably, consistently. They have to scale. And we're going to talk about some unique challenges facing dental labs here in a minute, just so we can kind of connect the dots from what I call, you know, one side of the industry to the other, meaning the lab side of things to the clinic. And, you know, that's important to always keep those lines of communication open and understand the unique challenges facing both sides of the industry. But, you know, we have technology and material science coming in and rapidly changing processes clinically and in the lab. And there's the business strategy piece, right? Labs are businesses. And dentist office, you know, clinicians are running businesses, and they have to function that way. And how do we plug in the technology and the material science with that time-tested, you know, art, hand craftsmanship, and then also the business strategy piece to make it all come together? A really good example is what we're doing here tonight, right? We're here learning together, and, you know, NDX is providing this awesome educational opportunity. That's a pretty strong business partner right there. And I heard Jessica saying hi to one of you doctors on the webinar tonight, saying that you're here pretty regularly for CE events. And so you know what a valuable resource that is. And really, when we collaborate and communicate and share our knowledge, that's when we can all really thrive and grow. So interesting. This is a little bit of an older, some older stats. But we're going to, you know, now, you know, take that lens down and focus on one application. And we're going to talk about night guards and splints. And, you know, we've known for years that there's a certain segment of the population that night guards are pretty useful for, right? Bruxers, grinders, sometimes nighttime, sometimes during the day, stress related. And we know that it's been around for a while, but here's, you know, where we're at today, or within the last year. Some of you may have seen this survey. Heck, some of you may have even participated in this survey, that we can see that over 70% of clinicians are reporting seeing an increase in dentition-related damage to teeth grinding, right? 63% are seeing an increase in chipped teeth, 63% in cracked teeth, and 62% are seeing an increase in TMD and TMJ symptoms. So this is where we're going to hit our first poll question of the night. So we're going to pop it up on the screen. And what we're going to ask is, how many of you are seeing an increase in bruxism based on, you know, just the way that the world is today? In your practices, are you seeing an increase? Like magic, that poll question is going to pop up onto the screen. All right, or maybe we'll get to the poll question. We'll get to the poll question here in a minute. When it pops up, I can't see it if it is popped up. So go ahead and respond to it. But on my screen, I'm not seeing it. So if you see it, go ahead and respond to it. If not, we'll get to it in a minute. But let's talk about how night guards are made today. So if you fill out a prescription and you just send it out into the universe, and, you know, whatever lab anywhere is going to do it by any methods, here are the four main methods, the four main ways that night guards are produced today. So we have the traditional method, which is, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail in this in a minute, but it's basically it's a hand process, hand fabrication process. It's basically wax. And we'll show you that in a minute. It's wax, it's boil out the wax, and it's acrylic. And it's the way that it's been done for eons. Thermoforming, many of you may be familiar with the thermoform method. So basically that is, you know, pouring a model, duplicating the model, and then you're basically doing like a suck down technique, almost like a heavy bleach tray. And you can alleviate some of the labor But it is really what I've seen, and what most labs will tell you, is that this is not a direct comparison to an acrylic night guard in abrasion resistance and in strength and in longevity. But it is a process that's in use today. Usually you'll see those night guards priced significantly less than an acrylic night guard, or either these digital night guards, just because the material costs are less, and they can be completed a little bit quicker. If you want to go digital with night guard production, you can mill a night guard. And as you can see here, there's a puck with with 2 night guards nested and milled in it. And this moves a lot of the steps to the digital workflow. So you can take an analog or a digital impression, and you can you can either pour a model and scan that into some software, or just import the digital impression file directly into the software, and you can design the night guard. So now you don't have a technician at the bench, having to do all these steps by hand. They're in the software designing it, and then you nest it in a puck, and then you send it to the mill. Now, the only issue here really for lab production is that this is not a super efficient process for a lab. So it is moving some of the work from the bench to the computer, but then you got to put it in a mill. And when you're milling things, here's a real crash course in milling and production for labs. When you mill a product, well, I'll back up. Usually when a product goes digital and the production goes digital, like we saw with zirconia, and like we see with other things in our industry, dentures and some other things, when it goes digital, the first production iteration of digital will be milling. Okay, and milling in any industry, milling is inherently a wasteful process, because you're starting with a large mass of material and you're cutting out just the pieces you need, and then the rest gets thrown away. Maybe a percentage of that gets recycled. But it's in any industry, anytime you're milling anything, it's inherently wasteful. Okay, and in dental labs, when we mill plastics, you have to slow the speed of the mill way down. So when you cut a product like zirconia in a mill, it's a little bit of it's a harder product. You can spin that burr really fast, and you can mill things out pretty fast. But if you were going to try to mill an acrylic night guard at the same burr speed as you were zirconia, you would generate too much heat, and you would melt that acrylic or melt that material. So you have to slow the spindle speed way down, meaning it takes a long time. It takes an hour and a half, 2 hours to mill the 2 night guards that you see in this puck right here. And in an hour and a half or 2 hours, a lab can mill, probably a couple dozen zirconia crowns in that same mill. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense production-wise for labs to tie up their mills with products like this that are slow. They can't pass savings on to their dentists. They can't lower the price, and there's things that they just can't do with production. But when we move processes to 3D printing, now we're talking about a really efficient process, because you're not starting with a large mass of material and cutting out just little pieces. You're starting with a pool of resin, and you're generating the parts that you need from that pool of resin, and you can reuse, in most cases, in a lot of 3D printers, not all 3D printers, but in a lot of 3D printers, you can reuse that resin to print more parts. And it's a fast process too. You can mill 15, 20 night guards in a little more than the amount of time that it takes. You can print 15, 20 night guards in a little more than the amount of time it takes to mill too. So super efficient. I want to talk about some of the other issues facing the dental lab side of the industry, and how these night guards positively impact that, and why it should matter very much to clinicians. Now, you might see this pop up and go, NADL, National Association of Dental Labs, this doesn't relate to me, but this is every single clinician I can talk to about this. And my brother, my older brother, I like to remind him he's older than me. He's a prosthodontist, and we worked together, years and years ago, we worked together. And so I'm very, very sensitive to, running a dental practice, and also the future of our industry and where things are heading, right? And so this is really scary, honestly, because over 60% of dental technicians are over the age of 55. A good portion of them are over the age of 60 and kind of approaching retirement age. And only about a quarter of them, in this latest survey by labs, only about a quarter of them were listed as most experienced removable technicians versus least experienced. So let's break this down. We have 60%, over 60% of removable technicians, or all techs, are over the age of 55, and only a quarter of them are the most experienced. So they're going to be exiting the industry into retirement at a pretty rapid pace. And so we don't have a new crop of removable technicians entering the industry at the pace that we used to. We only have a handful of dental lab technical programs left in the country. I'm fortunate enough to have one out here in the Seattle area, Bates Technical College. That's, it's still, though, it's seen, I've watched them on the advisory board of that college, and I've seen the numbers shrink and shrink and shrink over the years. So we don't have the number of technicians leaving those programs coming to work at labs. Okay, so we need to preserve this removable knowledge. We need to be able to share that with a new generation of technicians that are not getting that knowledge in school. So where this digital technology comes into play is it allows those experienced removable technicians to get off the bench, move their career into the digital realm, and then labs can bring in and hire people with really no experience, and they can be trained in the processes much quicker because of the digital technology is very scalable. So, by some estimates, there's going to be something like, if we talk about removable as a general, pile of or percentage of work, there's going to be over 5 million dentures prescribed in the US this next year, right? And we're looking at stats like this. So we need to really be aware of the fact that these new processes are here, and clinicians need to talk to labs that are doing this, and we need to work together to figure out this daunting challenge. And here's another challenge facing lab. Well, this is facing every industry, right? I was scheduled to go to a meeting and speak this week, and I just got, it was leaving Thursday morning to go to Dallas, and I just got a notification today that because so many attendees of this meeting, and this is for a relatively small group, lab group, but so many of them are affected by flight cancellations that they're postponing the meeting, and they're scrambling to try to figure out when they're going to hold the meeting. So airlines are affected by staffing. Every industry is affected by staffing, but here's something you may not know, or you may know, or you may find interesting or not. But I spent years in a lab. In my last, 4 or 5 years in that lab, I was chief operating officer. I was heavily focused on the growth and the overall direction of the business. And we relied very heavily on hiring people with no dental or dental lab experience. And we would train them into lots of different roles. Sometimes they would become delivery drivers. Sometimes they would move, after a while, you realize, okay, this person is very reliable. They're showing a lot of initiative. They move from the delivery car into like the model room, or sometimes they would move into the CAD/CAM room, and they would start doing things like scanning models with our digital scanners, and then sending those files into the design software. And they would work their way up. And the dental lab industry is really still one of those unique industries where you can have no experience, and you can start at the ground floor, and you can move yourself into a really lucrative career over time. Problem is, we're lacking the people to come into those entry-level positions, and we're competing with, fast food restaurants. Honestly, in my area in Seattle, that's where the sign in the lower right-hand corner there is. This is interesting. I took this picture, and it said $16.50 an hour. And that was probably 2 months ago. This sign now says $17.50 an hour. So you can get hired at a fast food restaurant for $17 an hour in part of the country that I live in. Despite what the minimum wage is, we need to bring in technicians at minimum wage and then train them and move them. So you can see the daunting challenges facing this side of the industry. And really what happens when you start to move this production digitally is you get a lot of benefits. And here's some of those high level benefits. Number one, again, I said, my brother is a prosthodontist, and I'm very sensitive to dentists and how they need to run their practices. And there's a lot of decisions you have to make when it comes to technology. But when you prescribe a 3D printed Nightguard, you don't have to change anything you're doing. If you are taking a traditional impression, you can continue to take traditional impressions. If you have an intraoral scanner and you are taking intraoral scans, you can send an intraoral scan file and it'll be imported into the design software. So you don't have to change anything you're doing. That's what's great, right? Because I know a lot of times it's like, okay, there's this new digital product and I have to buy a piece of equipment to access this product, or I have to retrain my staff, or I have to learn a different process. And none of that is the case with this. So that's number one, pretty impactful. Super strong and abrasion resistant. And they have the comfort of like a hard soft splint, because this is a thermoactive material. And I have one right here on a model. And so, you know, this is not a sports guard. This is a super rigid material. I'm gonna try to squeeze this one here. But what happens is it's thermoactive, meaning when you warm it up in some warm water or it warms up to body temperature, it has a very pliable, comfortable feel. So you have it's like the best of both worlds. You have a very strong abrasion resistant night guard, but a very comfortable and a very, very good fitting one. I'm going to get into fit here in a minute as well, and let you know how that works and why it's improved. So yeah, better fit. You know, the digital production, like we just spoke about for a minute there, it is helping mitigate the shortage of removable technicians. Labs are starting to be able to take their experienced technicians off the bench out of production roles, move them into the digital world, and then bring other technicians in behind them and help them share their knowledge. And because it reduces so many hands-on steps, they just don't need their technicians to know all those steps. Those steps take years to learn how to wax and how to invest and boil out and finish a night guard. And you just can scale much quicker this way. Digital record is huge. So how many of you, this should have been a poll question. I didn't think about this poll question, and I will next time, but how many of you, so the poll question won't pop up, but I'm just gonna ask you anyway for fun. How many of you have had a patient that you know they need a night guard, you finally get them to get a night guard, and then you're trying to get them to wear it, right? And they come back for hygiene appointments and you can tell that they're not wearing it enough, and we know how that works. But how many of them call you and say, my dog ate the night guard? It's like my dog ate my homework, right? And now it's my dog ate the night guard. That is the majority. That's the number one way that night guards meet their demise, is dogs eat them, right? They grab them off the nightstand and eat them. You guys have probably heard even crazier stories than me. Sometimes people put them down the garbage disposal. They'll wrap them in a napkin and throw them away, all that stuff. It's kind of funny to joke about, but what's not funny is when you've spent chair time and the patient has spent time out of their life in the chair getting an impression, digital or traditional, doesn't matter. And then, you know, the lab has taken, 3, 5, 6, 8, 10, whatever your lab's production time is to make this appliance. And then the patient loses it because the dog eats it or whatever. And then you've got to start back over from scratch. And what digital production means for what it does for you and what it means for you is that when the lab creates this night guard, when they print this night guard, they store that design on file and they store it. And if the dog eats the night guard, patient can just call the dentist and say, dog ate my night guard. They don't even need to come in. Dentist can say, okay, no problem. We'll get you a new one in a couple of days. They call the lab, say, Mrs. Smith's dog ate the night guard. Lab pulls up the file, nests it in their next batch that they're putting in the printer, prints it, finishes it, sends it to the dentist. So in a matter of a couple of days, without even seeing the patient can swing by the office, pick up their new night guard. And you can figure out what that means for you as a clinician. Do you cover that under warranty? Do you charge the patient half price? Do you charge them full price? Lots of different ways to shake that out, but very, very, very beneficial. Nice stat from Keystone, the manufacturers who make this particular resin, their calculations show that there's over 2 million of these splints in the mouth worldwide since it hit the market over 3 years ago. So this is not, that's the other thing is, boy, am I a guinea pig for this? Is this, is this safe? It's been around for 3 years. So if you haven't tried one of these yet, you're definitely out of guinea pig territory. You're actually approaching the other side of that spectrum at this point with lots and lots of them in the mouth worldwide. This is my dog. And so his name's Omac. There's a city in Omac, Washington. It's kind of northeast side of the state. It's really cool. It's kind of like deserty over there. I know you always think Seattle rains. We actually do have some desert areas in our state. But he's a golden retriever. It's about 5 years old. He eats anything. And what I mean by that is anything. Like you leave anything laying around. I don't know if I should have had another poll question. Who's got a golden retriever? But anyway, this dog, he's eaten, I don't know, all kinds of toys. He's eaten, dish towels. One time he ate one of my socks. And the bummer about that was usually, without getting into too graphic detail for you, when he eats something, it ends up resolving itself. It'll come out one way or the other, right? But this time he ate one of my socks and it went in, how socks are, it went in lengthwise into his small intestine and it couldn't be removed. So it was a $2,000 surgery. That was one of those decisions, when they're like, yeah, we're going to have to put him into emergency surgery. And you kind of go, do I really? I do love this dog, right? $2,000, but I'm kidding. But anyway, so I thought, this dog eats anything. Let's see what happens if I offer him a KeySplint Nightguard. I'm going to see what happens. So let me show you what happened when a golden retriever was offered a KeySplint Nightguard. So if I would have let it go, would he have eaten it? Probably. But what I wanted to try to attempt to prove here was KeySplint Nightguards, 3D printed Nightguards, they are golden retriever resistant, right? And if I could prove that, and I could go to the manufacturer and say, I figured out something about your Nightguards, maybe I could have leveraged that into some financial reward or something, right? Like we can make another claim now, besides all these other claims that you can show and prove about this material, you can say dogs won't eat it. Wouldn't that be cool? But anyway, I don't think that's the case. Let's take a look at some stats. These are, again, some stats provided by our friends at Keystone. And you can see, your mind goes to, well, is this strong? And what am I sacrificing? And you can, again, see the abrasion resistance here is equal to or less than a lot of these other popular acrylics that you see listed on the left-hand side of your screen. But send your eyes to the right-hand side of the screen really quick and notice the number of test cycles. So this material is as abrasion resistant or stronger, more abrasion resistant than a lot of these products at double the number of test cycles in this test. And in fact, KeySplint hard material, if I'm not mistaken, shows almost the least volume loss of anything on this whole, any other material on this whole study. So, and if this is available to you, if you'd like to get this, contact Dennis and he can get you this if you'd like to take a look at it. But again, not sacrificing anything as far as strength goes or level of patient care. Let's take a look at traditional Nightguard fabrication, and then we're going to take a look at how the process differs with these 3D printed splints. So if you haven't been to your lab for a while, and let's face it, most of us haven't been anywhere for a while. Hopefully that's changing. We're crawling out of our basements slowly but surely and kind of squinting at the light. But if you haven't been to the lab, or you really aren't super aware of how a Nightguard is produced, that's totally fine. We're going to just kind of dive into that a little bit here, but I want to make a distinction really quick before I do. So back on that slide, I don't know, 10 slides ago or something, I was showing you the four different really main ways that Nightguards are produced, right? And it's traditional acrylic, it's thermoform, and then if you go digital, it's milled and printed. We're going to talk tonight about, when I talk about traditional Nightguard fabrication in a little more depth here, and then compare that to printing, we're going to talk about the acrylic method, not the thermoform method, because as I said before, the thermoform Nightguards are really not a direct apples to apples comparison for abrasion resistance and strength. So although that is a process that's it produces a Nightguard that works just fine, it probably just won't work as long, or it might not work as well for somebody who is a really heavy Bruxer grinder. There's people that it wouldn't matter if you made these out of metal, they'd probably figure out a way to grind through them, right? You probably know some patients like that. So we're gonna talk about how traditional night guards are made. So if you were to go into a lab and you were to look over their shoulder and hang out with a technician, like I did when I shot this video and then edited it together, you would spend about 4 total hours with the technician. So that's how long it would take if you set your stopwatch when the technician basically started, pouring the model, or basically started producing a model and duplicated a model and then started the process that you're going to see. If you were to take 2 prescriptions in 2 different case pans and split them up and give them to 2 different technicians in that lab and say, I would like you to do a 3D printed night guard, and I would like you to do a traditional acrylic night guard. The traditional acrylic night guard pan would come back to you to be billed out and sent to the clinician's office in a little over 4 hours. How long do you think it would take that other case pan to get back to you? Any guesses? It'd be a little over 2 hours. So total production time in lab, if you talk about total production time, hands-on and idle time would be, in this case, for traditional, where stone is setting up, where it's boiling out, where you're processing the acrylic and things like that. Idle time for printing would be when the printer's printing it, when you're curing it, and these other steps that I'm going to show you in a minute. But about half the total time, and the 3D printed method takes about 1/3 of the hands-on labor. So let's look at what that hands-on labor is. Let's see if this video wants to play. Try this again. I think I might have messed it up by. Hold on here just a second. Let's see why this is being finicky. See if we can get this to. I don't know why this video is not playing, but let me just run it. I'll just run it down for you. The video is only about a minute long anyway, but I'll just outline the steps for you. So what basically happens with a traditional night guard is you start with, say, a traditional impression, or if you start with a digital impression, then you're gonna probably print or mill a digital model. So somehow you've got to get to a model, and if it's a traditional impression, you're going to pour a model, and then you're going to duplicate that model. So to do a traditional night guard, you actually need 2 models, and one of those models is going to get destroyed and thrown away, actually. So with the first model, you wax, like you see in the left-hand side of your screen here. A technician's going to produce that night guard out of wax, and it's going to take them maybe 20 to 30 minutes to produce the night guard in wax. And they're going to get it as smooth as they can. They're going to get the uniform thickness as consistent as they can. And then they're going to get the occlusion the best they can. They're going to get everything dialed in wax the best that they can. And then they're going to take that model with that night guard on it, and they're going to invest it much like they're going to put it in a flask, much like you would a denture, right? And once it's in that flask and it sets up, they're going to put it in some boiling water, and they're going to boil out the wax. The hot water is going to melt the wax out, and you're going to be left with basically the stone that is, around where the wax was, and then the model where the teeth are. Okay, and then you're gonna break that flask out once it cools. You're going to put some mix up some acrylic and put it in there, or you're going to inject acrylic in there. There's different ways that you can do that acrylic, and then you're going to process that acrylic. Usually that's, again, under a hot water bath or under some heat of some kind. And then once that part's done, you're going to break apart the flask, and you're left with an acrylic night guard on the original model. You then have to get that acrylic night guard off that model. So they take an air chisel, they chisel it off, and then they have the night guard. That's when the first model is gone. Then you have the night guard, you put it on the duplicated model, and you do your finishing. And your finishing means you go back to the bench and you go to a lathe and you start grinding and adjusting that night guard. And there's lots of adjustment that needs to be done, because when you wax, no matter how good of a waxer you are, you're going to get varying thickness of wax, and you need to get that night guard to a uniform thickness. So they're going to do that first, take off any sharp edges. Then they're going to adjust the occlusion, and you go, well, look, Jamie, I can see that there's opposing, tooth and teeth marks in the occlusal of that night guard there. Why do you have to adjust the occlusion? It looks like it's set because there's expansion and there's just a lot of things that happen when you do this process, right? This lost wax process. There's expansion and variability in the stone. There's expansion and variability in the acrylic, the temperature of the room, the water, everything affects that. And really, when we talk about all these steps of production, if anybody has an engineering background or you know any engineers, I know like 6 engineers. I don't know why, but I know a lot of my friends are engineers. But we have conversations about what they refer to as copy error. And it means if you're doing a production process, the number of steps in that production process, and the further you get away from that original impression or that original mold or whatever you're trying to duplicate, however many steps are in that process, you get further and further away and you introduce more room for copy error every single step of the way. So if you just look at it from that standpoint, you look at the number of steps that are involved in producing a traditional acrylic appliance versus digital just removes over half of the steps. And so you have less room for copy error and you end up with a better fitting appliance. So anyway, once you get the occlusion dialed back in and you've got uniform thickness and you've got it all smooth, then you polish up the acrylic Nightguard and you check it, on the model one more time, and then you send it off to the clinician to be seated. Because I'm stubborn, I'm going to try to play this video one more time, and it's probably not going to play. There it goes. Aren't you glad I'm stubborn? So let's take a look at those steps. So here you are waxing it up. And by the way, this technician was like a 15-year technician that I worked with at this lab, just super good. There's investing it in the flask. They're going to let that stone set up. They're going to put it in boiling water. We'll skip through that step. We'll just get to the point where they've already boiled it out and processed the acrylic. There's that acrylic Nightguard. Then they'll take a hammer and break that out of the flask. And then here's the chisel. Some Nightguards meet their demise right here. I'm not kidding. A lot of times, this is a pretty tedious process here where you're trying to get all the stone out of that acrylic Nightguard. And sometimes they'll break right here. And then you start all the way back over from waxing. Now the fun begins. We get to grind. This is back on another model. Remember, we had to make 2 models in this process. Going to redial in the occlusion, and now we're going to polish it up. So I'm going to touch in a nutshell here how 3D printing works, and then we're going to show you, we're going to contrast and show you how production looks to make these Nightguards digitally. So in a nutshell, 3D printing, there's lots of different 3D printing technologies, but the majority of them operate mostly the same. So what happens, you have the different components of a 3D printer. You have a piece of glass, and that glass forms a vat that holds the 3D printing resin or liquid. And then underneath the glass, you have a light source, usually an LED light source. And then you have a build platform that lowers into the vat of resin, and that's what pulls out of the resin as your part is produced. So, well, how do we make it? It's a layer by layer process, right? So if you go to a movie theater and you're watching a movie and it's seamless, right? You're watching this movie play in front of you. If you look up into the projector room, you can see the light flashing. And if you were to go up there and pull the reel off the projector, you would see a bunch of individual frames of the movie. And that's essentially what happens when we print a part. You have your design file and you send that to some special CAM software, and it slices that file. If you want to print, something that looks like this, right? You have a file that looks basically like this. It has all these properties and this shape and these dimensions. And then the software is going to break that up into a bunch of slices. And then it's going to play each one of those individual slices on the underside of that glass. And what happens on the top side of the glass is the light shines through the glass into the resin, and UV light partially cures a very, very thin layer of that resin to the glass. The build platform then pulls that partially cured layer of resin off the glass. New resin flows underneath. You play the next slice of the part with light, and you do that over and over and over again until you have a part that's created. And there's lots of different 3D printers on the market. There's some different kinds. There's polyjet printers. They basically work almost like an inkjet printer, and they're actually, kind of like laying down layers of different resins. There's SLA, there's powder bed where you're actually, you can actually 3D print metals and things like that. And then there's DLS and some other ones. And you can see, again, if you're interested in this, I can get this slide to you. Probably share this slide with Dennis and he can get it to you. I don't want to sit on this slide too long because there's a lot to look at, but the crux of this slide is that there's lots of different types of 3D printers out there on the market, all different shapes and sizes, all different speeds, all different accuracies, all different costs per part. Some of these are very expensive to operate, some of them are less, etc. But if we focus on DLS technology, because that's the technology that's used to create these, when these came to the market, I should say, it launched on DLS technology. So if we differentiate that technology, how it works is that the piece of glass is actually a very special piece of glass that's oxygen permeable. Because what we know is that, well, the UV light will partially cure the resin to the glass. Oxygen inhibits the curing of that resin to the glass. So if you can pump oxygen through that glass, it creates what's called a dead zone right at the surface of that glass, where being the part can't partially cure and the build platform can raise off the platform faster as new resin flows underneath. And the process looks like this under magnification. So you can see the 3D printed part being pulled off from the build platform as new resin continuously flows underneath in that dead zone right above that oxygen permeable window. And you can see it in the relative thickness here to a human hair. So we're talking about a very, very small area. But what will happen with DLS technology when you're looking at mechanical properties is with traditional printing, it's that layer by layer kind of wafer cookie build profile. And with the DLS parts, you can see it's a much tighter grain profile. They're not oriented horizontally. They're almost at a 45-degree angle. And the strength of these, the strength mechanical property, that is not affected by the way you orient the part. And you can see with traditional additive manufacturing, the strength can be affected by the way that you orient the part. So you can print much quicker. You can print parts that have more strength and that are smoother and with a tighter grain profile, which is really nice when you're talking about, guess what? Things that are going to be in people's mouths, right? Because we know that bacteria loves anytime there's a crack or a pit in an appliance. And so if you can keep these more dense, the better for everybody. So that is a little crash course in 3D printing. But I'd like to kind of come back off of dental for a minute and just look at how 3D printing is being used in other industries. And it's really interesting if we look at the medical device industry, which is our cousin really with what we're doing. I mean, we're in the medical space and the healthcare space, but companies like Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, Moderna, lots of these big names that you recognize that have now become household names, fortunately or unfortunately, are using and looking at 3D printing as a way to deliver drugs and also to create medical parts for patients to be in their bodies in different ways before. So they're looking at things like 3D printing these programmable resins that are bioabsorbable, meaning you could create a part for a patient, say like a heart stent, and you could potentially scan a patient's chest, get the dimensions of the artery, and you could 3D print a heart stent instead of using something out of alloy or what they are doing currently. You could produce a stent out of a 3D printed material that could stay in the patient's body for a finite amount of time until the artery is healed around it, and then it could dissolve and pass through the body without a trace, not have to stay in there. Where I'm really, really, really curious about and excited about is microneedles. If you haven't heard of microneedles, you should probably spend a couple minutes on Google and look at what's going on with these. So there's two different ways that these companies are looking at using these. One is a dissolvable tip, again, out of those type of resins that you could inject the microneedle under the dermis and the tip would stay in there. It would administer the medication or the drug and then just dissolve and pass away and pass through the body without a trace, not have to stay in there. Or you could coat the microneedle with a medication or a vaccine. Here's an actual picture of a 3D printed patch of microneedles. And why this is, a couple reasons why this is really going to be impactful, I think, for our future is number one, what they're seeing in some of these studies is that you get a much higher immune response if you inject a vaccine or a medication just under the dermis versus going deeper with a needle stick into like the fatty tissue. If you don't go in quite as deep, you get a much higher immune response. And what's kind of exciting for the oral health industry, or for us geeky, like me, us geeky oral health folks, is that when they've actually studied injecting these microneedles into the mucosa, they get even a higher immune response in the mouth than they do from elsewhere on the skin. So pretty cool. So you could coat these microneedles with a vaccine dose, and then you don't need to have, potentially, you wouldn't need to have a trained professional who knows how to give a shot. You could actually have patients vaccinate themselves by taking the microneedles and just doing this. So again, this is all stuff that's being worked on. This is not, you can't go get a microneedle vaccine today, obviously, but you can see the exciting potential for the future of all kinds of drugs and medications that need repeated doses with microneedles. So I want to bring the lens back off dental, show you what's going on in other industries. Other industries also, like automotive and consumer goods, are using 3D printers to make everything from eyeglass frames to football helmets to running shoes to parts on cars. So any industry right now is being disrupted by additive manufacturing. So pretty cool. Coming back to dental, it's not just about splints, and it's not just about models. Anything you see here on the screen can be 3D printed. So surgical guides, even flexible gingival masks, lots of different parts and pieces. We're going to take a look here really quick, couple more minutes. We're going to just go quickly through the process that the lab uses to fabricate these 3D printed splints, and then we'll go into some Q&A. Hopefully everybody's still awake. I know it's getting late in some areas of the country. So basically, like I said before, if you're using an intraoral scanner or you're using a traditional impression, doesn't matter. You can send either to the lab. The lab is going to convert that traditional impression into a digital file, and they're going to send that into, and we can try right here. The poll question didn't seem to work earlier, but we can try to pop up a poll question here. How many of you have an intraoral scanner? Let's just try to pop up the poll question, see if it's working. Okay, doesn't look like the poll questions are cooperating tonight. So once that,
sorry, Jamie, it is. You're going fast. Well, I'm not catching up to speed with you, I should say, tonight. So, so we do have polling number 3 up. Do you have an intraoral scanner? And then we'll take it down a couple seconds here.
What's funny is I'm not seeing them, like they're not popping up on my screen. So I just assumed that it wasn't cooperating with you tonight. So.
Oh, well, this is the first one I caught up to you on. So it's showing the results at 54% yes and 46% no.
Cool. Let's take a minute. Do you want to pop up? Let's pop up. Did you already do the poll about are we seeing an increase in bruxing? Have you done that?
I have not, but I had your ESPN going. So I do apologize. It looks like a choice number 3 is in there, but we're curious if you can just follow through on a yes or no. Have you seen an increase in stress-related bruxism in your practice? Yeah. And I know there was a couple articles actually about this in the beginning of COVID on that spike. So right about 30 seconds. So I'm going to end the poll, and 87% are saying yes. Wow.
That's, yeah. So we know that we have a pretty drastic increase. We can do one more poll, the last poll question on Jessica, the last poll question. I can prompt you for that here in a minute towards the end. So.
Oh, sorry, I already launched it. Yeah. Cool. Have you ever prescribed? I'm trying to keep up with you. You got a lot of great information going. Have you ever prescribed a digitally fabricated splint? And we'll just give that a couple more seconds. It's a 50-50 race right here. So 3, 2, and 1. Who won out? Actually, 56% said no. 44% said yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thanks, Jessica. I'm glad we were able to get that. I love the polls are, one way to make it more interactive, but also it's just great to see what everybody's seeing in real life, right? Share that together in real time. So what we'll do, I got to jump back in here really quick. So that's what the design software looks like. You're gonna take, digital impression file. You're gonna take, a traditional impression. You're gonna convert that to a digital. You're gonna take it into design software, and then the lab is gonna use the tools in the design software, which are really powerful. They have all the same tools they have at the bench, they have in the software. You can do a flat plane occlusion. You can do ramped occlusion. You can control, the settings for undercuts. You can put it on a virtual articulator like you see here. You can run it around through excursions. Software is really, really amazing. Once you get it designed, you're going to nest them. So there's the CAD, the design, there's the CAM, that's the actual manufacturing side of things. So this is the software that's going to slice those Nightguards up into lots of different layers so that the printer can calculate how to print them. You can see the purple area there that looks kind of like a mesh is some support structure that is put on those Nightguards to make sure that they print out, correctly so that there's no deformation. And also when parts are printing, there's some suction forces that are involved and they can distort the parts. And so you want to make sure they're accurately supported to offset those suction forces. But you can see there's 10 Nightguards here printing in about 1 hour and 39 minutes. So pretty quick production. You're going to dispense the resin into the cassette, and you can see on the left-hand side of your screen there, and then you're going to print them. You're going to remove them from the build platform. Just use a spatula to remove them. You're going to separate the support structure from the Nightguard, which is they're just connected in a bunch of little tiny dots. So they just peel off kind of like an envelope, like tearing an envelope, just super easy and quick. You're going to clean them up in some isopropyl alcohol, put them in a bath of isopropyl alcohol on a shaker table, kind of like a washing machine almost. It rinses all the uncured resin off the surface. Want to swab out the intaglio to make sure you get all the uncured resin out of the inside of the Nightguard. Do one more 2-minute IPA bath after that, clean IPA to get all that resin off the surface. And then you let them air dry for about 30 minutes, put them in a cure box. They cure under nitrogen, UV light for about 30 minutes, and then they're ready to be polished up and delivered. So when you can compare and contrast those steps to what you saw earlier in that little video that didn't want to play and then did play, you can see how much more efficient this production process is and all the benefits that then come down the line for clinicians and patients, most of them that we have covered. So we're going to move ahead to the Q&A here. And I just want to wrap it up by bringing it back to that first slide, talking about the evolution of our industry and change. And I love looking at what folks from our past that were innovators. I love looking at what they thought about change. And I love this quote from Henry Ford. And we know that this is true, and we see it today, and we see that change is sometimes not a choice, right? And that's kind of where we're at in our industry here on the dental lab side of the industry is this is something that we're excited about and that we need more than we needed to go from PFMs to zirconia. We really need this change now so that we can keep up with all these Nightguards and dentures on the removable side of the industry. So, if you haven't seen the evolution of a dental lab technician, you're going to want to see this. This is about 1 day in the lab. This is 15 years in the lab, and this is about 30 years later. I'm not going to ask Dennis how long he's been. I'm not going to ask Dennis how long he's been. Dennis, don't answer this question. Dennis looks great. Dennis looks like it's his first day in the lab. So
it's over 40 years. So yeah, so this is how you look after 40 years. So,
well, I do have a theory that, Dennis is involved in his daily role in digital dentistry. And I have a theory that we're going to be able to start, reversing this aging process.
Yeah, I like that. That's great.
So maybe that's what's happening to Dennis and others. But here's a quick, as we move into Q&A, here's a reference slide for you. Just a lot of the stats and figures and surveys and things that I showed can be noted here. And again, if you need to see this, Dennis can get this to you if you have any questions. Great. And thank you very much. And we'll move to the Q&A.